You guys see, I think there's a lot of things that seem unrelated that are all pretty related right now. There's a massive protest underway by labor in France. There's a massive protest underway in the Netherlands. There's strikes on the underground in London. When we talk about global debt and US debt, we often, I don't think, account for all the debt, which also includes promissory obligations made to a workforce, a global workforce that's been working for decades. Individuals that have spent their whole lives committed to some company or to some government working with the expectation that they're going to retire and have some benefits paid to them. And there's this massive underfunding of those benefits and those pools of capital. We very quickly talk about unfunded pension liabilities. But when you actually kind of account for the number of people and the amount of capital that those people are expecting, that the workforce, the global workforce is expecting to be paid to them in retirement, both public and private, it's a massive amount of money that's not funded today. And you start to see the cracks in the system when that population says, my pension payments are not keeping up with interest, with inflation, or when there's a threat that pension payments or retirement benefits are going to kick in at a later age, or you're not going to get them fast enough, or you're not going to get as many as you thought you were going to get. We have that problem in the United States in the form of Social Security and these underfunded pension liabilities. That is the critical macro tension in this equation that I think drives the real problem that's going to come to a head at some point. Friedberg? I mean, my reaction is it is another very important voice stating the obvious. Like the arithmetic just doesn't work. When we had RFK on last week, I prodded him on his stance and point of view on the federal deficit, the fiscal deficit this government runs, and the entitlement programs that are only going to swell, and the debt burden, which has an interest payment obligation on it, that the interest payments are swelling. And when you do the arithmetic on all this, it's going to balloon the cost to service the debt. And without some degree of cutting across the board spending and entitlement programs, discretionary spending and entitlement programs, you can't make the interest payments, which all, inevitably leads to some form of default. So that's just the math and the way this all works out. And I think what he's done is put a pen to paper and shown that, call it roughly 2025 to 2035, you start to run into that fiscal scenario where, you can no longer generate enough income from the US economy to fund both the interest payment obligations on the federal debt as well as these entitlement programs. And something's got to give. Either you're going to have to default on the debt or you're going to have to cut the entitlement programs. And the point he's making is that the longer you wait to cut the entitlement programs, the worse it's going to get because you're accruing so much debt in the interim. And as we know, that becomes very politically unpopular. And what's so scary to me, and I've kind of shared this, and obviously Chamath has a different point of view, but it feels to me like this is that Don't Look Up movie moment where we have this looming disaster. We don't have any fuel in the car, and all that everyone's talking about is where are we going to drive the car? And every political conversation, every candidate gets on stage, gets on a podcast, gets on a TV show, and they talk about stuff that is simply not feasible. And the direction setting with respect to social policy, wars, geopolitics, how are we going to take care of our middle class? None of that stuff is possible to actually execute against without recognizing and acknowledging that we don't have gas in the car and we have to figure out how to gas up the car. Treasury currently expects privately held net borrowing of $1.007 trillion in this quarter, with an assumed end of September cash balance of $650. And then they said we expect another $852 billion of borrowing next quarter. That means Treasury is going to try and issue and sell $2 trillion worth of Treasury bonds in the next 2 quarters. That's $2 trillion of new borrowing by the federal government to pay our bills. At the start of the year, they were estimating 1.6 trillion for the year, which was an insane number. Now we're talking about 2 trillion in just 2 quarters. So rates are climbing. As a result, we need to borrow more. And this is a perfect manifestation of the debt spiral problem that we've talked about multiple times. Our fiscal spending outlay and the rising interest rates combine to create an insurmountable debt spiral that is now manifesting in the fact that we need to sell $2 trillion of treasuries. And here, yeah, so people talk about the market going up, but I'll use an analogy. If you live on an island and there's 2 huts on the island and there's a bunch of shells that people are using for trade, each house is going to be worth a certain number of shells. And then if people went and found a whole bunch of more shells, the price per house would go up in number of shells. But there's just more shells in the supply, and effectively you've inflated everything. And that's effectively what's gone on with the US fiscal condition. We've talked about this many times, but I think it's always worth a rehash. In a democracy like we have for the past 250 years, without adequate constitutional constraints, it has always been the case that over time spending goes up, government spending goes up. And this is because in a democracy, people ask for their government to do more every year. And as they ask for their government to do more every year, the government agents who are elected say, okay, here you go. And they spend more. And eventually when the borrowing capacity gets unlocked, which is what happened in the United States, when we went off the gold standard, you borrow like crazy, you print money to fund those borrowing costs. And you use that fundamentally to drive the next voting cycle, which is to give people more and more of what they want. But eventually the bill comes to you. And in the United States, the bill is coming due. Look, I'll restate this on the show very clearly. California has a $1 trillion fiscal cliff coming up because of the pension obligations. I don't know if you guys know this. I'll make this one point, very important to know. They once tried to change the benefits, the pension benefits, and they lost a court case. And so there's precedent in California state court that you cannot change pension benefits on the date that someone was hired. You can never change their future benefits. Really important to know. So all of the benefits that have been given to every California public employee up to this day, or that they've been promised, they are promised for life. And you're not allowed to take them out. And they cannot be disposed of except for some form of bankruptcy. And there is no mechanism by which the state can declare bankruptcy. So fundamentally and functionally, there are 2 ways that California can be saved. Number 1, you pass an amendment to the Constitution to fix this pension liability problem. And number 2 is the state has the ability to declare bankruptcy. Everything else is all about how long are you keeping the state alive for. I'll just say one more thing, Jake, and then you can go. The only other way, besides, a massive long-term tax regime to fill the hole, would be some extraordinary productivity gain. And this is where we can all have a hope and a dream and an investment and an effort around technology. AI, automation, people think that they're threatening to start some job, energy. But if you can get energy down below 3 cents a kilowatt hour and you can scale its production by tenfold, if you can automate a lot of labor, if you can get AI to do a lot of stuff that we do today, productivity will go through the roof. The economy will grow fast enough to get out of the debt bubble and meet all of these liability obligations.
So there are 3 ways. Just to summarize,
that's why I think to me that's the long term. The medium term is going to be this tax stopgap, this very high tax stopgap, and then the short term is going to be all the shenanigans that we're talking about.